Most horror stories end with the creature's defeat, the mad scientist's downfall, and the world returning to normal. But what if the nightmare didn't end there? What if the monster wasn't the only one? In this chilling tale, the scientist who once dared to defy nature is pulled back into his dark obsession, this time with a far more dangerous idea. The first experiment may have been a mistake, but what if he could make something even greater? Something perfect. Hello to all the classic people who are returning. I'm glad you're back. I want to welcome any new visitors and let you know that there will be spoilers ahead. Today on Classic Movie Review, we are taking on Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. This is the second of the classic Frankenstein films. Of course, there is the silent Edison Frankenstein 1910. There's a link for that in the description. But considering the classic three, I believe this is the greatest of the 1930s film. Bride of Frankenstein introduces us to the lightning-haired maid of the monster and many other elements that will be clear to any fan of Young Frankenstein 1974. James Whale directed Bride of Frankenstein. Whale was born in England and began writing plays while in a German POW camp during World War I. Whale had 23 directing credits, including being uncredited for Hell's Angels 1930 when he worked for Howard Hughes, Frankenstein 1931, The Invisible Man 1933, and there are links for those two below, Showboat 1936, and The Man in the Iron Mask 1937. A great quote from director Whale says, "A director must be pretty bad if he can't get a thrill out of war, murder, and robbery." This film has a decent rating of 7.8 on IMDb.com. On RottenTomatoes.com, the film has a 98% rating on the tomato meter and an 87% audience approval rating. New York Times film critic FSN said in a May 11, 1935 review, quote, "Boris Karloff comes again to terrify the children, frighten the women, and put a jiggling tune upon masculine spines as the snarling, lumbering, pitiful thing that a scientist formed from grave-snatched corpses and brought to life with the lightning. Now, in Bride of Frankenstein, he clambers out, cuffs a few of the remaining villagers into oblivion, and stalks once more through the moor, the graveyard, and the hills, hated by man, gibbering at fire, and of all things, begging Frankenstein, Colin Clive once more, create a mate for him along the same general pattern. In more ways than one, this is a changed monster. Now possibly under the influence, at Universal, he is slightly moonstruck, hungry for kindness, and even, oh perish the thought, for love." Actors. The first actor that we will discuss is Boris Karloff. Karloff was billed in this movie simply as Karloff. I don't think I will get much argument if I say he is the greatest Frankenstein of them all. However, Peter Boyle was pretty good. Karloff was a British actor who began his stage work in Canada before moving to Hollywood. He made some silent films, but had to hold down jobs such as Ditch Digger to survive. By 1931, Karloff was on his way with The Criminal Code and Five Star Finale. The latter film was nominated for an Oscar for Best Picture. Of course, the biggest role of all was that of the monster in Frankenstein 1931. Karloff was about 5 feet 11 inches tall. The costume that he wore for the role had 4-inch platform soles on his shoes that weighed 8 pounds each. Karloff's costume was designed by Jack Pierce and copyrighted by Universal Studios, making it more difficult for other studios to replicate Frankenstein's success. Oddly, Lon Chaney Sr., father of the Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr., was offered the role of the monster, but died before filming began. It was then offered to Bela Lugosi, who turned it down because he didn't want to be covered by makeup. A year later, Karloff played Imhotep in The Mummy 1932 and the starring role in The Mask of Fu Manchu 1932. There are links for both of those below. He played non-horror genres as well, such as being gunned down in the bowling alley in Scarface 1932, and there's a link for that in the description, and as a super religious soldier in The Lost Patrol 1934. While he was a gentle man by nature, it seems that horror was his calling. Karloff played the monster 3 times. In the original Frankenstein 1931, today's film Bride of Frankenstein 1935, and Son of Frankenstein 1939, which also featured Lugosi. He was also featured in House of Frankenstein 1944, and Frankenstein 1970, which came out in 1958, as the Doctor, and there are links for all of these in the description. Colin Clive was a British actor with a very brief career. You know him for the phrase, "It's alive! It's alive!" Unfortunately, He drank himself to death by the age of 37. In the first two Talking Frankenstein movies, he played Henry Frankenstein, the monster's creator. Elsa Lanchester played the role of Mary Shelley in The Monster's Maid. In the role of the bride, she had to wear her hair wired up and her eyes taped open. Lanchester was born in England. As a child, she studied at the Isadora Duncan School in Paris. She began her movie career in 1927. In 1928, she made 4 films with Charles Laughton. They married the following year and remained so until his death in 1962. Lanchester was persistently dogged by her role as the bride, even 40 years later. She enjoyed playing gritty roles with a touch of humor. She did this in such films as The Bishop's Wife, 1947, there's a link in the description, Witness for the Prosecution, 1957, Mary Poppins, 1964, That Darn Cat, 1965, and Blackbeard's Ghost, 1968. Una O'Connor played the role of the housekeeper. O'Connor was an Irish actress who was consistently cast as comic relief. She had a very heavy Irish accent and a very animated face. She was outstanding in The Invisible Man, 1933, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, there are links for those two, and Witness for the Prosecution, 1957. When watching Young Frankenstein, 1974, you can see Cloris Leachman virtually channeling her inner O'Connor from Bride of Frankenstein. E. Clive was a Welsh-born actor who played the role of the Burgermeister. He began his film career late in life, with one of his earliest roles being in The Invisible Man, 1933, and there's a link for that. He made almost 100 pictures in a very short career, but he was generally typecast as a stiff butler or foreign aristocrat. 2 American actors had small uncredited parts in this movie. Walter Brennan played a neighbor, and the great John Carradine played one of the hunters who stumbled into the monster at the hermit's cottage. Dwight Frye has a small part as Carl, who is now the Igor character. Frye played Carl closer to Renfield from Dracula 1931, a part he also played. Story: on a dark and stormy night, the camera zooms into what appears to be a stone version of the Bates Motel. A couple of English dandies, Percy Shelley, Douglas Walton, and Lord Byron, Gavin Gordon, in a room are trying to convince Mary Shelley, Elsa Lanchester, to tell them a story. Mary says the lightning frightens her. Lord Byron talks about the original Frankenstein story she had written earlier. If you didn't know what was coming, you might switch the movie off at this point. This vacation scene is modeled after a real trip that took place in 1816, known as the Year Without a Summer, as the world was in a volcanic winter following the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815. Lord Byron highlights the story of Frankenstein 1931, and several clips from the movie are shown. He calls Carl, Dwight Frye, a dwarf, but he's really more of a hunchback. It continues through the creation of the monster, the loss of control, and the death of the monster and its creator. Mary begins to tell the continuation of the story. Since she was the author of Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, in 1818, she begins at the burning mill from the end of Frankenstein 1931. The mill collapses, and it seems that the doctor and the monster have perished. Minnie, Una O'Connor, the housekeeper, was seen handling the hounds during the vacation scene earlier. Minnie cackles with delight that the monster and the creator are gone. The Burgermeister, E. Clive, tells everyone to go home. They load the body of Henry Frankenstein, Colin Clive, for return to the family castle. Most of the people leave as the fire cools, but Hans, the father of the little girl whom the monster killed by tossing in the lake in the original, wants to see the dead body. He goes into the ruins and falls through the floor, where he finds the monster, Boris Karloff, whom he is looking for. The monster is alive and well, and he kills Hans by drowning him. The monster crawls out of the ruins and knocks off Hans's wife as well. A silent owl watches the proceedings. The monster appears behind Minnie, and she runs away screaming. Elizabeth, Valerie Hobson, receives the body of her dead fiancé. Minnie tells the other staff that the monster is alive, but no one believes her. Elizabeth said she was foretold that there would be trouble on her wedding night. A bit later, Minnie sees Dr. Frankenstein's hand move and declares him alive as well. Dr. Frankenstein is indeed alive and well. Frankenstein is trying to settle down after creating a monster and surviving the crap storm he created. He feels a little bad for what he has done, but he's still pretty struck with the idea. His idea. Elizabeth says he is being prompted by the devil. She sees the hand of death in the room. She seems to be a little crazy, pointing at an unseen death figure. Suddenly, his old college professor, Dr. Pretorius, Ernest Thesiger, shows up and wants to see Dr. Frankenstein on a matter of grave importance. See what they did there? Dr. Frankenstein agrees to meet with Dr. Pretorius. Pretorius was dismissed from the university. The two men meet in private. Pretorius says they must work together.
You have created a man. Now together we will create a woman.
Frankenstein says he wants to get well, get married, and go away. Pretorius says that Frankenstein is responsible for the murders committed by the monster. Frankenstein travels to see Pretorius' creation. At the lodging/laboratory, Pretorius makes a toast to a new world of God and monsters.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
Then he shows his live creations. They're very tiny. He's created a queen, a sex-crazed king modeled after Henry VIII, a condemning archbishop, the devil, a ballerina, and a mermaid. Pretorius says he's only been able to create miniatures in his experiments by growing them from source material. He mentioned that the mermaid grew from seaweed. So what did he use for the king and the queen and the ballerina? Created a devil, so he must have used a jalapeno for that. Many have often wondered why Dr. Frankenstein made his monster so large. It was so they could easily sew the parts together. Pretorius continues that he and Frankenstein must create a mate for the creature. Meanwhile, the creature stumbles through the woods. He's horrified when he sees his own reflection in the stream. A shepherdess sees him and falls into the water. The monster saves her, but she screams at the sight of him. A pair of hunters shoot and drive the monster away. The hunters inform the Burgermeister that the monster is alive in the woods. He calls for the bloodhounds, and the male villagers begin the search. They have pitchforks, but no torches, because it's daytime, which is really the best time for hunting monsters. The villagers take a few casualties, but they finally subdue the monster. They take the monster, who is secured only with rope, back to the village. They then place him in a dungeon and chain him to a chair. After the monster is chained up, the Burgermeister says, "Now we can get back to more important things." I'm wondering what's more important than a 7-foot monster killing people around the village. So they chain the monster up like King Kong 1933 was chained in New York City. He breaks free, and the guards fire a couple of rounds into the monster. The monster escapes, terrorizing the town, killing another little girl and maybe another couple. He then escapes into the woods. A gypsy family is camping in the woods near their round-roofed wagon. The mother is worried about the monster, but the father says he's locked up in town. The monster pops up out of the forest and gestures for some of the chicken that is cooking on the spit. The women all scream, and the man attacks him with a torch. The burned monster runs back into the woods. Shortly, he hears a violin and wanders to the house of a blind hermit, O.P. Heggie, who praises God for a friend who happens to be the spawn of hell. The hermit teaches the monster to speak, like violin music, cigars, bread, and wine. That sounds like a pretty good life. The two bachelors are living better than Felix Unger and Oscar Madison. Of course, the monster still doesn't care for fire, but he takes to cigars quite well. One day, two lost hunters come to the cabin and find the monsters. One of these hunters is John Carradine, the father of Kung Fu, aka Wai Chang Caine.